It's been a miracle, maybe a synchronicity for me to be here, not only because I love Samantha and I love what John and Samantha do, and not only because I dedicated my life as a student of love, but also I was wanting to come here because my school had the 30-year reunion, which was last weekend. And I was so busy and I didn't know whether I could make it. And when I heard the invitation, I said, for this dumbhead, there was a message, I should be here this week. So I was at the reunion meeting all my friends 30 years ago and talking about what we do and everything. And they asked me, what brought you here? And I said, reunion, but also I'm speaking at a summit. And they would go, what summit? And I would hesitate. Love summit, I would say. And I would have different reactions from people. Some people would say, yes, interesting. And some people, some people would have like heavy laughter. And some people wouldn't say anything. Then with the reaction, I would say, oh, I'm in business and this is love in business. I want to make a correction. But the reaction would go deeper. And that made me think and makes me think that the challenge we have with love in business. And I think that's the challenge that I'm going to share with you today, how I dealt with it and how I'm dealing with this. But before we start, I'm really curious about how you face this challenge, because probably that's what brought you here as well, to connect love and business. So I want you just to think just for half a minute about your challenge, about love and business coming together. And if possible, then I want to hear few voices. So just think about it. Anybody wants to share this challenge that I'm facing? Yeah. Too much fear of failure. Tell a bit more.
I'm afraid to let go of what you know works, because what if something new doesn't work?
So the challenge of trying new thing with the fear of it if it doesn't work, especially bringing something like love in our organizations. Maybe one or two more voices? Yes.
Too much noise.
Too much noise.
Share something authentically and actually be heard when there is a lot of selling that isn't authentic and it's just a lot of noise for someone's attention.
So too much noise, and finding our voice and hearing the voice in us also in a way within that noise. Thank you. And maybe one last? Yes. It's not perceived as professional, and professional in quotes. Exactly, like my trying to explain, love in business. Exactly, thank you very much. This reflects so much about actually the challenge I've faced in my life. And especially what you said about the noise and the complexity and the world of professional, I think until recently it wasn't easy to bring this together in a meaningful frame. One of my friends, Adam Kahani, he's got a wonderful book which I all recommend. He's worked with Mandela years ago. He's written a book called Power and Love. And I strongly recommend it. This is a book which helped me to make sense of love and business. And there I associated the professional, the business, which is simply the activity of getting things done, much easier. He says, Adam borrows from Paul Tillich a definition for power and love, and where he says that power is a drive to make things happen, which is simply primary driver of the businesses that we have. Then he goes on making a definition for love, which made love very accessible for me. And he said, love is the energy that brings, that connects things that are seemingly apart. That was an eye-opener for me. And then, when you think about power and love, and when I'm telling this story here, I will look at from the perspective of power when I talk about business. because this is, I think, the focus of the business that we are sometimes struggling with. I know businesses are more than power. I know they are more than status, more than profit making. But I think this is the struggle that I had all my life, and probably most of us are having with the professionalism. So they actually are seemingly contradictory, power and love. You know, getting things done and connecting. But you know, if we can look at our lives from a personal perspective, like somebody like me who's trying to achieve lots of things, getting things done, but forgetting his own personal connection with himself, that's kind of, you know, power without love. Or from a team perspective, a team working on a project, making the deadlines, is a sign of power, which is perfect. But if this team doesn't have trust, collaboration, or does have trust and collaboration, that's a sign of love. And we can take it to different levels in the organization. That definition made it very accessible for me. And then we can go on also looking at world from two polarities. One polarity is power without love, which Martin Luther King says it's abusive, it is destructive. Or we can look at from the perspective of love without power, which actually can be stagnant, as my wife says, and which can be anemic or sentimental. So think about, you're in love with somebody, but you're just in love. You don't go to movies, you don't make living together, you don't make love. It's kind of like that. So I'm going to tell about my journey, tilting from these two polarities, and how I discovered, and how I'm trying to discover the balance, and hoping that my story will help you also to make sense of some of the great things that you're doing and some of the challenges that you're facing. I come from Turkey. I was born in Turkey, grown up, and coming from a middle-class family. Turkey is a country which is a lot in the news, where in this country, we don't know what to do with power. We don't know how to deal with power. You can see it in our politics, you can see it with our truck drivers, you can see it with families, and you can see it with me from the story that I will tell. We don't know. This is probably because of our hundreds of years of imperial history where the power was held with the sultans. And now we have democracy and we don't know what to do with it. So we need maybe another hundreds of years to learn to deal with it. So I come from a family where my father was a physician in the army, which is an amazing place of power and authority. And as you know, early childhood determines some of our perspectives, some of our decisions. And my father was my first encounter with power and authority. And I started to make my decisions about power and authority with my father, which I thought he was hard to connect. He wasn't, but I had difficulty to connect. He was very rigid, and I found sometimes him oppressive, which he didn't mean to. That was kind of my reaction. And so I decided that connecting with power and authority was difficult. So it was a negative impression of me. But I found a way to connect with power. And my way of connecting with power was through success and achievements. I was a great kid, hard worker, climbed top in the school, and it worked for a while. I could solve conflicts, I could get attention, I could be loved, being successful. And that went on for a long time like this. Then, after graduating and enrolling to a top engineering school during my gap year, just before university, I came to Cincinnati as an exchange student. And Cincinnati, without me knowing it, turned me upside down. I say turned me upside down because I had a totally different experience in many ways. First of all, I came and stayed with a wonderful family. They are here, George and Rose. And I call them mom and dad because they took great care of me. And I have anne and baba, which is Turkish, and I have mom and dad. I have the privilege of having two families. So my encounter with George and Rose was unusual. Let's start with George. He was very successful, top heading the University of Cincinnati's Economic Center. He was sought after, advising governments for economies, around the world. But he was cool and fun and very easy to connect with. Now was my impression of power and authority was completely destroyed with him. And Rose, I'm going to make a confession while Rose is here. She doesn't know about this. I arrived their home. I was like 17 years old. I was trying to find my way, understanding. One morning I woke up. And I went to the kitchen. Nobody was up. It was early. I was planning my week, and I wanted to look at the calendar. I saw a calendar on the table, which had, dates and everything. And so I wanted to look at it. I opened the page. I wasn't stalking your calendar. I'm going to tell you. I opened the page, and I saw almost like diary entry, and I couldn't help not reading it. That was written the week before I arrived. It was saying, God, please give me courage and power to give the love Alper needs, without even knowing me. Then I started to think that love can be unconditional. I didn't need to be successful. I didn't need to be anybody. And that pattern continued through my year. And I didn't know it was changing me at that time. And I met wonderful people. One of them is here, Trisha, who took a nerd like me and introduced me to poetry, photography, arts, literature. I fell in love with E.E. Cummings because of her. And I played in the band. So I thought I was having a wonderful year, but I didn't know I was being shaped completely. I came back to my engineering school. I had decided that I didn't want to be an engineer, but I didn't know that. So I passed engineering school with the knowledge of my high school. I started businesses during the university. Then right after that, I started a training business. And through that training business, I operated with my model of power without love for some time. Not listening to the voice that was in me. But that costed me a lot. That costed me health and relationships. At one point, I remember Vic was talking about it. I had a very vivid dream, and I decided to change because it was physically killing me. I decided to change, and I started to do more than making money in my business. Being successful. We were already number one in Turkey, well known, but I wasn't feeling fulfilled. And I wasn't so happy despite I had lots of things. So we started to bring some practices of love. At that time, we didn't call it. It was like for connection, engagement. So we had a group work with a psychotherapist in the organization, which was very unusual. We worked together as a company for 3 years, which had incredible results. That was put as a case study in one book in the UK. We put love as a value for the company still on our website, and we learned a lot of things from that. We did work with Gestalt and transaction analysis. And we were doing wonderful things. We were awarded a workplace award together with Patagonia by World Style magazine in Europe. So we were doing fantastic. And we listed our company in the stock exchange with all these practices, listed in becoming the first services firm So it was all going great. And I had just started a doctorate in UK, doing my thesis on leading with the heart. So all the things. And I had done a couple of revisions in my thesis and submitted my copy. That was like 2013. I received a response from my examiner that my thesis was refused, which I was completely proud of, with all the practices telling my story. It was refused. And it needed a thorough revision. 300 pages, a thorough revision, which means I needed to rewrite. And they told me, it's wonderful, you've done great things, but there is a big thing missing in this thesis. And we don't see you and how you relate to power and how you use power. You seem to be discounting that. It didn't make sense. I was almost getting angry, my first reaction. These Anglo-Saxons are there, infatuated with power. I passed this, I'm beyond that. You're not at my level. Then I remembered a story which I shared without much reflection in my thesis, that one of my friends, when I was interviewed, he would say, well, you're doing great things, but people are afraid of you. I'm like, how come? How come? Somebody tell me about this. So it took me a while to understand that, and that took me a dream. At that time, I was working with a mentor who's informed with Sufi teachings, and he's a Jungian psychotherapist. And one of my first dreams with him was I was seeing a man, a kind of an ugly man on the floor, trying to hide. He was half naked, and he would look terrible, like a burglar. And he would then run away when he sees me and everything. And I couldn't make a sense. All of a sudden, things came together, because as you can imagine, that was my impression of power, masculinity, getting things done. And for me, it was an ugly thing that needs to be hidden. I remember Rachel this morning talking about that. So at that point, I decided to find a balance from the place of power without love to the place of love without power. How could I find balance? And I received a lot of help from my wife, who's here. She's putting up with me in my journey with that. And one of the insightful moments that I was working with a board, and at the time that I was still ignorant about power, and they would tell me about the things they wanted to do and the objectives, and I would tell them, well, that's great, but let's talk about coaching. Can we do like some group coaching, and can I show you some of the things I know? It's very good for you. I'm kind of like that. And they would say, these are excellent. Listening, feedback, all these things, but we have things to do. Can you help us? And I was resisting in the beginning, but it took me a while to appreciate that you have to build a power base, before you talk about love. That's how the world works, at least in where I live. So, and actually Martin Luther King also talks about it, that love makes power generative, and power makes love generative. So we need both. We need both, and that led me to reframe my purpose, to reframe how I work, in a way that I have the two. And my Sufi teaching also helped me to also make a decision when they are equal, tilting towards love. So we always have a choice when we have that balance, and when we have a choice, it's what matters, that what we choose. And that led me to start a private university with all the experience as a part of my inquiry, which Samantha kindly mentioned, European Leadership University, and where we do everything that I have learned throughout the last 25 years about learning, connection, love, coaching, growth, personal development, and bringing that together with the elements of power, which is in our geography for young people is the simplest form of status is a university degree than a job. Because if you want love in our country, you need this status. I'll tell you what it means. If you want love, which means marriage in our country, then you need to go and ask for the girl. When you go and ask for the girl with a box of chocolates, you don't know you're going to a tough interview. The father goes, he will put the chocolates aside, the father goes, nice to meet you, and you want our daughter, that's nice. What do as business? That's very important. And if you have a good work, first tick, you're halfway through. And what did you study? And if you have a good college or university, that's tick, and you get the girl, you get love. Unfortunately. So, learning from my experience with the boards, creating a power base for young people in the geographies that we work was the foundation of the university that we did, which simply does now job-ready degrees for in digital skills area, which is there's a huge skills gap, and connects young people at the early periods with the employers, with a fully accredited degree, with competency-based teaching, and then they study and work at the same time. So they don't graduate and get a work, they get a work while they're studying through our employer partners. And in return for that degree, and in return for that job, we negotiate and contract with the students that we work with them from a personal development perspective. So they don't become only engineers, they go in a route like me to become a human engineer. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but all the practices of law we're trying to deal with into their agile methodology, coding, data science. So that's what I do, and I think that's what I learn. So I have chosen a path where, which Jimi Hendrix says that, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace. And I want to finish with a poem from Ibn Arabi, who is one of the Sufi scholars. Nathan today talked about religion, capitalism being a religion. So I want to read this poem and leave with this with you. There was a time I would reject those who were not my faith, but now my heart has grown capable of taking on all forms. It's a pasture of gazelles, an abbey of monks, a table for the Torah, a Kaaba for the pilgrim. My religion is love. Whichever the route love's caravan shall take, that shall be the path of my faith. Thank you very much.